The Florida Marlins reached the baseball mountaintop when they won the 1997 World Series in just their 5th season. But their unlikely story began on July 5th, 1991, when businessman and blockbuster entrepreneur Wayne Huizenga officially secured ownership of Miami's expansion team. In the next few years under GM Dave Dombrowski, they acquired some crucial pieces, both through strong scouting and savvy trades, including for Padres star Gary Sheffield. Then, they struck while the iron was hot after the '95 season and supplemented their roster with some marquee free agents when the time was right. That offseason, Dombrowski splurged in signing Devon White to field their center, then landing premier free agent starting pitchers Al Leiter and Kevin Brown. And thanks to their geography, they won the sweepstakes to Cuban pitching phenom Livan Hernandez. There was a palpable sense of excitement throughout 1996. Sheffield bounced back from some injuries to put together a full season, becoming arguably the league's best hitter, and their two shiny new free agent pitchers were wildly successful, both finishing in the top 3 in the majors in ERA. After that '96 season, they hired chain smoker/manager Jim Leyland and threw big bucks at Alex Fernandez to pitch, Bobby Bonilla to play third base, and Moises Alou to play left field, shifting Jeff Conine to first. And it worked. The beginning of the '97 season was all blue skies and birds chirping. And in July, they plugged their one significant hole at second base by trading for Craig Counsell. On September 23rd, Florida clinched the NL wildcard, and after sweeping the Giants in the NLDS, was set to battle their fearsome division rivals from Atlanta, who were stacked with 4 legit aces. But the fish prevailed in 6, and this 5-year-old toddler of an organization was off to the World Series. Awaiting them were the Cleveland Indians in a series that would go the distance. In Game 7, on the doorstep of heartbreak down 1 in the 9th inning, this Craig Counsell sac fly sent the winner-take-all game to extras,
Tagging is Alou. Game 7 of the World Series is tied.
where Edgar Renteria drove in Counsell for the championship-winning run.
A liner off Nagy's glove into center field. The Florida Marlins have won the World Series.
Just like that, baseball immortality. They probably would have kept winning too, if not for the greed and deceit of the one man who should have reveled in their team's success more than anyone, owner Wayne Huizenga. But instead, everything fell into complete shambles and rubble. A collapse, if you will. In the midst of that championship season, on June 26th, Huizenga decided he'd had enough of baseball ownership, citing massive financial losses, and announced his intention to put the team on the block. At a time when the Marlins were owners of the 3rd best record in the majors at 45-30, Huizenga wanted to bail because he wasn't seeing the financial dividends he wanted after a whole 3 months. A writer who covered the team explained that Huizenga planned on finding out in one season whether South Floridians had any interest in Major League Baseball and whether they would support a competitive team. He was testing the value of his investment by investing more. He was buying a competitive baseball team for South Florida and threatening South Florida at the same time. Just days following their title, Huizenga demanded a new stadium funded by taxpayers, or else he'd slash his $53 million payroll and still move forward with selling the team. He didn't get his precious stadium, so on November 6th, he reached an agreement in principle to transfer ownership to team president Don Smiley and some pals if they could cobble together enough capital. In an effort to justify saving some cash, Huizenga fudged the numbers to make it look like his World Series winning squad had actually cost him $34 million. However, in reality, well, he was soaring quite nicely in the black. But the heart wants what it wants, and so then came the fire sale. On November 11th, just 16 days after World Series glory, the first domino fell. Moises Alou traded to Houston. A week later, their closer and center fielder were both out the door. Franchise icon Jeff Conine got shipped back to Kansas City 2 days after that, and in the months that followed, they found new homes for Kevin Brown, who was the best pitcher on the planet across his 2 years in Miami, and Al Leiter. Just take a look at what their 1997 payroll looked like compared to their payroll going into the '98 season. Amid a completely unstable ownership group and a team put together with duct tape and super glue, they lost 11 of their first 12 games. In mid-May, they wanted to send a package including Sheffield to Los Angeles. But that was tricky because Sheff loved playing in Miami and said he was so happy that I had made my agent put a blanket no-trade clause in the contract extension I'd signed after we won the series. I told him to specifically put the word blanket in there because I wanted to make sure that it was unbreakable. But as a favor to Charles Johnson, because the trade would provide a great financial opportunity for the catcher and his family, he didn't completely slam the door on the idea. Plus, fellow Marlin turned potential Dodger Jim Eisenreich laid the situation out pretty matter-of-factly for him. So he flew out to LA to meet with Dodger management, where he played some hardball with them. On top of his lucrative contract, he demanded a $6 million check, a $3 million house, and for the team to pay his taxes. And if they did it, he let them know very clearly what would happen. The Dodgers ultimately acquiesced, wrote a gigantic check, and Sheffield, Bonilla, and Johnson were officially ex-Marlins. Shipped to Florida were Mike Piazza and Todd Zeile. Piazza spent all of a week in Teal before being rerouted to Queens for Preston Wilson. Zeile lasted a couple months before he was off to Texas for a couple guys who'd never suit up in the bigs. Their payroll had now dropped all the way down to $13 million, half of which was allocated to Alex Fernandez, who didn't even play that season due to a torn rotator cuff. Every other tradable contract of any consequence was now gone. Reigning postseason hero Livan Hernandez was the only active Marlin whose annual salary required a second comma. In August, Boca Raton commodities trader John Henry presented Huizenga an offer of $150 million in cash for the team. A few weeks later, Smiley encountered various complications, which caused him to officially pull his bid, clearing the way for an agreement between Huizenga and Henry on November 6, 1998, 1 year to the day after the announcement of the initial ownership transfer plan to Smiley. That's one headache finally solved, but a huge one still remained on the field. Completely stripped to the bone, they were one of the worst hitting teams in baseball in '98, and their team ERA of 5.18 was the worst by an NL team outside Mile High Denver in 45 years. Add it all up, and the result was 108 losses for the defending champs, the most by any NL team in 29 years. In fact, Dombrowski never even thought of them as the defending champs. Jim Leyland, tired of managing his AA ball club against big league teams every night, resigned 4 days after the season ended. A December trade of Edgar Renteria to St. Louis meant less than 14 months after winning it all, their exodus extended to every core player of their championship outside of the injured Fernandez, as well as Hernandez and Counsell. The latter two just had to wait till midway through the next season to get traded. That left Fernandez's bloated, unmovable contract as the lone key World Series piece remaining till the end of his career after 2000. Following a third straight losing season, and after his outstanding GM jumped to Detroit in November 2001, Henry decided to cut bait, and he sold the team ahead of the '02 season to art dealer and former Expos owner Jeffrey Loria. And slowly but surely, after a half-decade wandering through an abyss, trying to rebuild from rock bottom, lightning struck Miami a second time. They hit home runs by spotting the talent of youngsters like Miguel Cabrera and Josh Beckett, and in 2003, after installing Jack McKeon as manager about a quarter of the way through the season, they became awesome again. The Marlins went 75-49 once he took over, better than anyone else in baseball in that time, except those pesky Braves. So, like '97, they had to settle for wildcard status. They once again faced and defeated the Giants in the NLDS before a date with the Cubs in the NLCS. Florida lost 3 of the first 5 and was facing a 3-run deficit late in Game 6 at Wrigley, sitting just 5 outs away from handing Chicago their first pennant in 58 years, when everyone's favorite Cubs fan robbed old friend Moises Alou of a chance to catch this foul ball. The door was left open just a crack for the Marlins, and they busted through, rallying for 8 runs in that inning before taking Game 7 the next day and punching their ticket back to the Fall Classic. There they faced the Yankees, and after falling behind 2-1 thanks to scoring only 5 runs through the first 3 games, the Marlins bounced back to win the next 2 games at home, taking a 3-2 lead back to the Bronx. For Game 6, McKeon gave the ball to Josh Beckett on short rest after throwing 108 pitches in Game 3. All his 23-year-old ace did was toss a complete game shutout.
Beckett picks it up, tags Posada, and the Florida Marlins are world champions.
Against all odds, and almost by accident, this team was somehow, someway, a champion again. Even more outrageous, what ensued was a pretty impressive aftershock to the seismic-shattering earthquake of a collapse in '97. Though not nearly as flagrant as 6 years earlier, that offseason they immediately lost 2 of their best bats, trading Derek Lee to Chicago and watching Pudge Rodriguez sign with Detroit, and they also traded a starting pitcher, Mark Redman, to Oakland. Midway through the '04 season, they traded away another starting pitcher, Brad Penny. At the end of the season, a third starting pitcher, Carl Pavano, signed with the team against whom he pitched a World Series masterpiece 14 months earlier. That's 60% of the starting rotation and the heart of a championship-winning lineup quickly out the door, virtually killing any chance of an extended run of dominance. On September 26, 2004, following a 6-3 loss in Atlanta, they were mathematically eliminated from postseason contention, kicking off a new, lengthy drought of spending their Octobers at home. Since their inaugural season in 1993, the Florida Marlins are one of just 5 teams to have won multiple rings, their first coming quicker than that of any other expansion team before them. Despite that, in their first quarter-century of existence, they'd never won an NL East crown. And outside their 2 championship years, they failed to crash the postseason party in any other season. Because if the owner is hell-bent on maximizing that bottom line by whatever means necessary, it simply doesn't matter how good of a team you've got or how bright the future could be. Sometimes not even reaching the mountaintop can prevent the cold, hard reality that the business of sports will spawn a complete and total collapse.
Thanks for watching this episode of Collapse. If you've got this far, then I assume you might have liked it. If so, go check out the other ones and keep your eyes open for future episodes. And the best way to do that is to subscribe. Love you.